What's up guys and welcome back to Tech Planet. Today I'm going to take you on a tour of a really cool orchid subculture. Let's check it out. So this orchid we're going to be talking about today is the Neofinetia Falcata or the Vanda Falcata, and it is a pretty small Asian orchid and it's got quite a dedicated following. I wouldn't say it's a very large following because you don't see much of this in the US, but it's really popular in Asia. During my last trip to South Korea, I decided I wanted to check out one of these not really nursery, I guess greenhouse. I really don't know what you would call this. But this place is where all the hobbyists meet. They actually store their collections here, and it's just a really cool place to stop by and check out. I will put a link in the description, but this place is called Jongran-sa, and it is out in Ilsan. It's a little bit west of Seoul. You'll definitely need a car if you want to visit this place because it's kind of in the countryside, but it is worth it if you have a car and you like plants to stop by. Right off the bat, you're noticing in this footage there are a lot of these orchids and they all look relatively similar. However, it's the seasoned veterans in this hobby that can really tell the difference and kind of tell you the value of these or what makes them special, what makes them unique, because there are tons of different hybrids. Well, I don't really know. Honestly, I'm not really sure if they're hybrids or if they're just cultivars that people have gotten through random genetic deviations or what, or from seeds, but there is a ton of variations to this orchid, and if you look at the wild style orchid, they're very different. You'll also notice a pretty strange structure actually in this greenhouse, and there's like a lot of cages or almost like prison cells, and we'll get to those in a little bit. But one of the cool things was when we arrived is the owner was I don't know if you'd call this repotting, I guess so, or remounting, but he was going through a lot of these orchids and remounting them, and the process is pretty cool and very unique to this orchid compared to many other orchids. So like I said earlier, there's like a really large culture around these, and it's really about the appearance of these orchids. They really take meticulously care of them and how they mount them, and there's like reason behind everything they do, and there's just a heck of a process for setting these things up for success and for display. And with the owner doing this, I got to film a lot of it, which was pretty cool. Almost every way I've seen these displayed has been with a mound of sphagnum moss, and that's what I originally thought it was. I actually bought a wild type one a long time ago and tried to emulate what they were doing without actually knowing, and I just wadded up a ton of sphagnum moss, but actually they use these really thick wooden poles with like a rounded top, and they start to build the moss up on top to give it this like dome style shape, this like hollow cylinder underneath, and they use some string mounted above to tie it up really tight and keep its form. Once they've got a bunch of those made, then they take their orchids that they're remounting. These are probably orchids that have outgrown their previous pots or their previous mound and need to be remounted. So the owner goes around it and trims it up, clipping off dead roots or other unsightly things. Again, there is a large culture around this, so I don't really know what the purpose is of all of this or what the desired look is, but it's pretty cool and pretty meticulous. Once he's got the orchid all cleaned up the way he wants it, he puts the sphagnum moss like dome back over that pole, and then he begins to actually mount the orchid, putting the roots around it uniformly. And then the next step is they take these really long pre-selected fibers of sphagnum moss, which a lot of this is pretty expensive if you want to get these longer pieces, because a lot of it gets kind of ground up and whatnot. But anyways, it seems very important to how they build the outer parts. They don't use little short pieces because it wouldn't grip on well, and they slowly wrap it around the roots and work it around and sort of sandwich the roots in between two thin layers of sphagnum moss. And again, they use string to secure everything. You can see they have a giant spool just hung above the table, which is actually really smart because it's always there when you need it. And so he just works it around this orchid, creating this perfect little like cylindrical dome that they can then set into a pot. A lot of times I think these orchids are growing up in mountains and whatnot, or like on cliff sides, so they need a lot of airflow, but they still need that moisture. So I think sandwiching it between the two layers of sphagnum moss provides that root protection, keeps them moist, but lets maximum airflow through. There's a hole in the bottom of the pot, so there's a lot of air that can go in, underneath, all around, so they can really breathe. I think I killed mine off because I just wadded it up in there because I didn't realize what they were actually doing. So it was really cool to see this firsthand. Most of them you just use these clay pots or like a typical terracotta pot, but they did have some really fancy ones on display, and I know when they go to show these, a lot of times they use a fancier pot, and it just brings the overall appeal to the orchid there when you have something super fancy versus the plain terracotta pot. But either way, they're really cool in the way that they mount these, and I think it's a really special and unique orchid mounting technique that you don't see in a lot of other species. Alright, now that you've seen the process for mounting these orchids and getting them potted up, it gives you a little more context for what you're about to see next. And that is all these random shelvings inside these cages. And you might be wondering, what exactly are these cages and what's going on here? Well, I don't know if this is due to geographical reasons and just how Korean people live with a lot of high-rise apartments, but it's not easy to care for a lot of plants, so people actually rent out these cages in this greenhouse because it's perfectly acclimatized for these orchids. You don't have to worry about anything, so you just pay a monthly fee and you get to keep your cubicle and you get to keep your collection safe. I haven't really mentioned this too much, but a lot of these orchids are thousands of dollars. It's very similar to, well, I would say it's more extreme than the whole aroid craze that we've all been familiar with. These plants go for hundreds of dollars, sometimes thousands of dollars, so each one of these cubicles is worth more than you can imagine. Being in this greenhouse was super fun because I really love this whole subculture, all based around one type of orchid. It is super awesome. You do see different orchids in their cubicles from time to time, but the majority of them are these Neofinetia Falcatas, and they are beautiful, and these collections are amazing. I really love those little like shade bowls that they mount above it. It's like really sophisticated just to provide shade to one of the maybe more fragile ones, maybe one that was a little sick or they're reviving, just to not give it as harsh of a light and let it kind of relax. Just neat that they have these cool little contraptions for setting this up. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a really popular hobby in China, Japan, and Korea. I believe this did originate in Japan originally, but you'll notice a lot of tags are written in either Japanese, Chinese, or Korean, and that's where they've come from, those like cultivars. Like I said, it's a hobby, a pretty big hobby in each one of these countries, and they all are developing different cultivars, and then they're shared, traded, or sold across. It's really cool to see these like multi-country collections. It's just neat, and I really love these little subcultures that exist around plants, and it's just a really neat little world that I never knew existed until I actually visited Korea. Now, I have no idea how easy it is to find these in Japan or China. There are a few other areas in Korea that you can find, so if you're visiting any one of these countries, I would definitely find one of the Facebook groups that they have out there and see if you can find someone who can recommend some areas to go to, because they're not quite straightforward to find, because you end up having to figure out what these would be called in the actual language of the country, and it's just not easy. I had to reach out to the Facebook group, and that's how I was able to find this place. But the people there are going to be really, well, maybe they're not everywhere, but at this place, really open to talking about everything. Luckily, I had my wife with me who can speak Korean, so we were able to hear a bunch of really cool stuff about the orchids, and it was just a really awesome time, and they were very welcoming and just super kind. Even though my son was there with us, who was like, I think 7 months at the time, and he kind of cried and got a little angry at one point, but they were really nice to him too, and it was just a really cool experience. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed that little glimpse into that entire subculture about the Neofinetia Falcata orchids. They're really awesome. It's actually one of my favorite orchids just because there's such a variety of basically the same orchid. They just found many ways to express different looks, different sizes, and just variegation. Just everything about it super cool, and I really love the culture around how they actually prepare it, mount it, and display it. I think it's super awesome, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video about all of that. As always, may your plants grow strong and healthy. I'll see you next time.